But however, the opportunity to work in F1 came up, and I felt like it was one I couldn't pass up. So I basically went for it. Definitely that not only are they going to work, they're going to work in a sort of long period of time. Definitely a lot of back and forth that goes on with the FIA in terms of legality of certain things. I think things like obviously introducing synthetic fuels, I think is definitely a fantastic start. Put it simply, the main reason is because everyone wants to have the best advantage. Things like the pre-chamber within the power plant is something that is, I think, probably the most valuable IP to each engine manufacturer. We're now compromising on the quality of foundries, for instance, that we're going to try and source metals from.
Hello and welcome to Stripping the Dipping. You're joined by your usual co-host, AMG Dent, aka the MDM, the modern day Morgan Freeman with the voice that charms all. And what can I say, whilst we're in this summer series segment, everybody's on the summer break and enjoying themselves, I've been digging deeper into the world of Formula One and certain things which, maybe don't get the limelight and appreciation they should. So with great honor, I'm very, very excited today to introduce today's guest. He is a design engineer for one of the leading teams in Formula One. He is the one and only George Brown. George, how are you doing today?
Not too bad. That was an awesome intro, Denz, man. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no worries at all, man. I always try and keep the energy up on the podcast, and it's always sensational when I have guests like yourself, coming here to bless the content, man. So I'm really excited and very happy to have you here as well. So George,
Awesome.
it was super funny that we were just talking backstage and we just realized that the world is such a small place in a sense because we've grown up quite locally to each other and indeed went to the same secondary school as well. So lots
Definitely.
of shared kind of things in common there. But first question I like to ask all the guests is, where did it start for you, man? What were your earliest memories in relation to Formula One or mechanical engineering and motorsports? And what path did you take education-wise to put yourself into the awesome position you're in today?
Mm-mm. So my earliest memories with Formula, actually with engineering was I was born in Germany, so I'm from North London, but prior to that, I've kind of lived around in, I'd say 3 countries growing up. So Germany, Nigeria, and obviously the UK. Germany is obviously known for having a sort of deep sort of engineering kind of culture, especially with cars. So I think kind of growing up in that, I just kind of fell in love with cars from that point on. To be fair, my dad selling cars at the time kind of helped a little bit as well. So I was around cars quite a bit. I used to kind of go with him to sort of car mechanics to pick up cars and drop cars off and things like that. So I would say at that point, I asked my parents, I said, I was really young. I said, what does someone that, wants to work with cars, what do they do as a job? And they said, oh, they're an engineer. And I said, all right, cool. That's what I would like to be then. And then I say a couple years after, I was introduced to this guy who used to drive this little red car in Formula One called Michael Schumacher, who obviously was massive at the time in Germany. Due to my parents watching Formula One, I think from that point on, it was just a case of, right, I'd definitely love to do this. And then I'll say fast forward to a couple of years later. Now I was in the UK at this time. The year was 2009. And Ross Brawn, who was obviously team principal of Ferrari back in the day, he had basically won sort of the drivers and constructors championship with his own team, Brawn GP. And I think that was something that I think just really, really just inspired me. And then I kind of knew at that point, and I definitely wanted to work in Formula One and obviously win more championships as well. So at the time, as we just discussed, I'd now moved to the UK. I was going to Winchmore Secondary School in North London. And at the time, I was just obviously kind of just a regular kid, just like everyone else, just, getting into a bit of trouble, but still, focusing on my studies and, being a cheeky little kid that I was. And then when it got to a time, probably I think a year after that was when I was doing my GCSEs. And then obviously subsequently my A-levels, I started getting a bit more serious. I was quite lucky in kind of having parents who kind of laid out the path for me in terms of trying to become an engineer, what subjects I need to focus on and do. So my maths and sciences were things that I definitely kind of made sure I was kind of on top of the class, during school. And yeah, from that point on, did my A levels, then went to uni, studied mechanical engineering, went to City University of London. So I kept it, I sort of stayed local with it. It was literally a train ride away from home. I didn't really want to, I didn't really want to have any sort of distractions, and I didn't want to kind of uproot myself from kind of the home situation. I was happy staying at home and kind of going to uni and just sort of making friends, studying, meeting like-minded people interested in engineering like myself. So yeah, did that. Did a year's placement in the middle of that, and then after that, yeah, got into the industry. Didn't get into Formula One straight away. Basically just got into motorsport industry. So I worked for some small kind of, I'll say, consultancy-based motorsport and high-performance engineering companies, and then eventually found myself into Formula One.
Man, that is amazing, George. And just listening to you there as well, it's almost as if I've lived my life through like another person as well. Because we kind of touched on the fact that we've lived kind of in North London, and some of those experiences I could definitely relate to as well. So you mentioned like growing up and having Formula One with your parents watching it, and the Michael Schumacher era, which was amazing.
Yeah.
That like kind of transitionary period where Russ went on and then basically saved those mechanics and those staff at Honda, because it was like the very hard times of 2007, 2008, going into 2009, where Honda said they were going to pull out the sport. Loads of mechanics and employees were going to be made redundant, and then Russ Braun, as a team principal, like took that leap of faith to then become like a team manager, owner, and go there. And then the engineering side of that too, with the blown diffuser, was amazing. And then touching on the earlier stuff you mentioned as well, just having your parents there, to keep you grounded, to keep you focused on your studies and your goal as well. Growing up in North London as well, I kind of get that too, that, there's so much going on. And, as a kid, you obviously want to dabble and indulge in a little bit of the stuff that happens here and there. But it's so key, to kind of have that dedication and that kind of discipline as well to, keep focused on the goal in mind, and to continue to keep, working towards your aspirations. So that's amazing, and I think a lot of people find that story as well very relatable as well, George. And it's almost amazing that you've had that experience while living in Germany as well, living back in Nigeria too as well. All of those experiences, they mold you as a person, and they're so fundamental to the calisthenics of a person, and how they are, how they interact, and the morals and values as a person too, man. So huge respect to you. And in the later part of that response as well, you talked about moving on and graduating successfully from university, doing your first 2 roles. So having done the what we call over here the CRB check, as the kids like to call it these days.
Yeah.
You did some time with RML, and you joined there at graduate level. You then worked hard and diligently got promoted to the Powertrain Design Engineer. You also done some time as well at Delta Cosworth. Could you tell our audience more about these experiences and how they equipped you with the skills that will be transferable to the role you have today at Red Bull?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah. So yeah, I'll start off with RML Group, Ray Mallock Limited. They're a relatively small-sized sort of engineering I'll call them a consultancy firm. They're sort of a white brand. They operate as a white brand usually. So what they do is they take on a lot of work for, I would say, bigger OEMs in terms of engineering sort of activities, whether it's kind of putting together a electric hypercar, or kind of essentially operating racing teams for big OEMs in different sort of formulas. So they're known for sort of running it in world touring cars for several years. So I joined them kind of a bit after that era. They were kind of into their sort of EV era. I don't know if it's public knowledge. I'll probably keep it sort of, I guess, as a white brand at the moment. We developed a electric hypercar for a big Chinese electric car brand. I'll leave the rest for you guys to figure out. But essentially, from clean sheet, a lot of the chassis and the powertrain was developed by RML Group. So at the time when that was kind of bubbling, I was able to join the company. Like I said, they were a relatively small company. So what they were kind of doing at the time for the size was so impressive. So I felt like it was absolutely awesome, me kind of joining them and getting into the thick of things. In terms of not even just design, I was getting into the thick of things with like performance engineering. Within 6 months of me being into my, I want to say, yeah, it was my, because it was a 2-year graduate scheme. So 6 months into that, I was really flying to China, supporting those cars out there. That became like a bit of a regular thing as well. So I kind of became the say sort of go-to guy for kind of diagnosing problems on the car. So I need to know the ins and outs of how the car worked, not just the electric powertrain, but also the active suspension and aero on the car. A lot of the sort of complex systems that were working on the car, I needed to understand how they worked and kind of failure modes that they'll go into, so I could know if something's gone wrong. I know the telltale signs of where to go to basically solve the problem. So yeah, I learned so much doing that experience there, and because I would say primarily I'm sort of a design engineer, but getting to all those kind of different roles, I was able to feed back into my sort of base knowledge as being a design engineer. It gave me the tools to know what things to design for and kind of see it from different points of view, whether it was the end user or even the technicians putting the different parts together when being built together. So that was a great experience. And then had various different crazy projects I was able to work on. I don't know if I can really name them per se, but the ones that even weren't really even involved in motorsport, they had to do more with, I'd say, athletics. But basically providing some engineering solutions and support in that aspect was pretty cool. And then just before I left, I was able to help bolster the manufacturing capabilities within the company in terms of battery manufacturing. So I was able to help put together sort of automated battery welding system for our different battery packs. So basically, we'll be able to have an automated machine basically weld cells together in various different, I'll say, patterns or numbers of welds or things like that. So that was some work that I was basically able to work through during the pandemic on. And I want to say that was a very good project for me to get involved in, because I definitely feel like that helped me in terms of the amount of stress that everyone went through during that project. It helped me definitely today working in Formula One, because you go through those, you're in those similar high pressure environments, but because you kind of feel like you've been through it already, you know, you have those past experiences to kind of rely back on, to know that, you know, you have the talent and obviously sort of the tools for you to kind of work through that stress and still deliver. So I'll say that was RML. Delta Cosworth was a lot shorter, a bit of a pit stop, to be honest. I basically moved on from there from RML to Delta. Pretty much the role was quite similar, but this was now even more involved, because I would say Delta are a bit of a smaller company. So primarily, I always want to base myself as a powertrain engineer, but through Delta, I was even able to get involved in some design work on sort of the more chassis or vehicle performance or dynamic side as well, which was quite cool. But however, the opportunity to work in F1 came up, and I felt like it was one I couldn't pass up, so I basically went for it.
Man, that is incredible, George, man. Like, honestly, just to kind of hear this precursor, you know, of all the different roles that you had and just the progression, you can see the natural link and progression between all of those different things you experienced and you worked on throughout these different projects. And as well as that, you mentioned keeping productivity up during the pandemic, which a lot of people struggled with, I feel. So again, that kind of character building element definitely comes into it. And also, like you mentioned too, just how all encompassing in terms of the roles and understanding the foundations and fundamentals in relation to resolving complex technical matters, just the appreciation of that, you know, and being able to develop and enhance that skill even from a grassroots level all the way to the kind of, you know, very high pressured stuff you're dealing with now. So
Yeah,
it's very impressive, and you know, you can definitely see a link. And also it's impressive, you know, when certain people, they grow up and they have like a background where everything's mapped up for them already. It's just for them to just
Mm,
do the kind of like standard stuff. That's one
yeah.
thing. But somebody like you know, a journeyman that's been through from like literally the seed and grown through it organically, I think I find that more
Mm.
impressive, and a lot of people as well, man. So big up your damn self, George. But you
Thank
know,
you.
you're welcome, man. You're welcome. But to get into the source, because you know, on this podcast, the people love the source, man. We got to get into Red Bull and just the season so far. And for you
Mm,
guys, I know I'm sure that you're feeling quite relieved that it's been a very decent season. At the beginning of the season, one or two reliability issues and
yeah.
engine kind of parts and stuff like that as well. But I think that was to be given that this is a completely new era of Formula that we've stepped into. But more importantly, it's just been impressive how consistent Red Bull have been. The RB18 seems to be like, a very strong beast that's not really deterred by much.
Mm.
The question I want to lead with, George, is what are the biggest challenges that a design engineer like yourself faces when it comes to improving reliability without it coming at the expense of performance?
Well, to be honest, with that, I'll say the hardest thing with that is the time you have to turn it around in, and also, as you said, in order not to compromise on performance, um, you have to make sure your designs are robust. And there's several techniques that we use to try and get around that within short lead times. So I think it's having the engineering understanding to a particular depth where you can save time by focusing on the things that really matter in terms of improving performance as well as reliability. So I'll say it's that thing. It's always down to the fundamentals of engineering. That's what allows you to say, you know what, this part of apologies, I'll have to speak in powertrain terms because I'm more well versed in that. But for instance, on the engine, several parts of improving reliability. So the structures, for instance, you have to have the engineering knowledge in terms of, for instance, the structural integrity of the structural elements of the PU. For instance, you have to know which parts are going to be more prone to failure as opposed to other parts, and be able to not only use computational tools to try and verify that, but also more empirical or physical testing to sort of validate the simulations as well. So I would say the biggest challenge is doing that in the timeframes that we have.
Oh, okay, it's very insightful there, George. Thank you for that. And definitely, I could see the emphasis on trying to understand those kind of technical hiccups, in such a
Mhm.
short period of time. And actually, kind of a nice linking question into that as well, George. Everything doesn't always go to plan. Some things, sometimes you plan something, sometimes you design something, and on paper it should do A, but then in reality, when you put it on the car or in the kind of like build process, it might
Yeah.
not go through, it might fail, it might not deliver the performance that you expect. How do you guys deal with like the failure or like the design flaws or like the lack of a team result it might cost you, and how does that affect the morale of the team, and your colleagues in relation to yourself and your other colleague designers?
So that's a great question. First of all, I'll say I think working in Formula One, I think as an engineer, I don't know if it's an unspoken thing, but I think one thing that every Formula One engineer has to have is the mentality that things are going to go wrong, and rather than trying to beat themselves up about it, they have to kind of adapt quickly and learn from them. So in terms of capturing things going wrong or failures, I'd say one thing that great Formula One teams do is they try and capture everything. They try and record everything that's gone wrong. They'll try and record it so they can use that as data and tools to understand why it's gone wrong and exactly why it's gone wrong and how they can improve on it. Another thing I'll say is in an ideal world, with air quotes, because sometimes some solutions. This is something that we try not to do, but sometimes you may find solutions kind of they're sort of generated in terms of designs and they're put on the car in an ideal world, and actually in the world that you kind of want to have is you want those designs to go through several stages of validation. So obviously through the design, obviously I've mentioned CAE, so we should have several different CAE tools to try and kind of validate that from in a computational sort of world. But then you also want to have some physical testing as well. So you want to go through some rigorous physical testing of the particular parts, so you know definitely that not only are they going to work, they're going to work in a sort of long period of time. And then it's only at that point that we are then confident that this is something that can run on the car and obviously not just fail catastrophically or unexpectedly during a race.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just on the topic of that as well, George, whilst we're in this kind of like segment 2, could you explain just, in general terms, of course, not releasing any of those trade secrets,
Of
just like
course.
how did the teams go about using things like CFD? And I know you're more on like the engine side, but even stuff
Mhm.
like wind tunnels or dynos, I guess, would probably be more appropriate for your
Mhm.
division, to test different design philosophies or different components. What's really involved, in the design process from start to finish when you have an idea to it actually getting fitted to the car?
Well, no, I mean, I'll try and go through it in a very, as you said, in a very general manner without sort of being specific per se. We do obviously CFD is also very relevant in internal combustion engine design as well. You have a lot of different fluids going around the PU. Some are rejecting heat from the PU, so it stays nice and cool. Some are generating heat. Some are generating heat for us to use as power. So understanding how the geometries we can create within the PU to allow these to basically flow around as efficiently as possible, we wouldn't be able to get there. I guess the first step through CFD. We also have other. So as you mentioned, dyno is one example. We have other testing elements that we use to basically validate a lot of the simulations. So obviously CFD as well as FEA, we use a lot of finite element analysis. So essentially simulating the way different geometries can respond to loads within the PU, for instance. And that's very important too, because again, the PU is also in a very high temperature environment as well, which affects materials that we use in the PU. Some drastically, some we don't even understand exactly how they are affected. So those are things that we try to use simulation to try and predict, but then we also use some testing elements to validate the simulation as well, so we can better understand that. So all I'll say is, because at Redbull Powertrains, we are primarily working towards the 2026 PU. Some of the regulations are in place. Not all of them are in place just yet. Those are still kind of going through a lot of agreement sort of stages. But yeah, we're putting ourselves in a place where I think we'll be bulletproof in terms of the way certain regulations will kind of change in terms of testing anyway. So that's as much as I'll say really. But yeah.
Sure. No, that's excellent insight, George, and thank you for elaborating on that as well. And you touched on like another kind of intriguing element and facet of that too. What's the homologation process like working with the FIA when you're having to get certain parts or patents signed off and approved for by their technical standards?
Yeah, that's a great question. To be honest, that one's a little bit above. I say for now, well, it's not necessarily above my pay grade. It's something that I guess I haven't got much experience in as of just yet.
Fair.
But there is definitely a lot of back and forth that goes on with the FIA in terms of legality of certain things. Because actually, to hark back to what you mentioned, so obviously we're in 2009 when Braun introduced the double diffuser. That was something that it was an innovation that they basically, I guess, come up with, and essentially a loophole to the regulations. Rather than just running with it in secret, they basically not just approached the FIA, they actually approached the other teams to let them know. Well, this is all according to Ross Braun, by the way. Actually, I don't know if this is true, but apparently he's approached the other team and say, "Hey, by the way, guys, we've come up with this thing. It's a game changer. Just so you know, it's still within the rules. Hey, just saying, right?" Which is why a couple other teams also had the double diffuser during that season. Obviously, they were able to run away with the championship with that. And I think a similar thing with the blown diffuser that actually came through Adrian Newey or Red Bull, I think a year or two after that. So I think what tends to happen is if you have an innovation on the car, that seems to take up a lot of relative amount of lap time. Usually there is some negotiations or some bargaining with the FIA, or at least just letting them know that, hey, we've come up with X, Y, and Z. Just so you know, that's how we came up with it, and look, it's within the rules. We're not cheating, such and such. This is what's going on, and the FIA can go, okay, yeah, no problem, great, and then they'll usually ban it in the year after, or just kind of run with it until let me not name anyone, but certain people will just come up and say, hey, this isn't right, or they'll complain about it. So those are usually the kind of the dynamics that happen with those kind of things. You tend to, it's usually listed as several changes during the season, for instance, on parts of the cars that I think tend to be accessible actually to different teams, just for traceability as well. So teams are aware of what's being done, and obviously no one's cheating basically.
Sure, and I think it's great, that you've given us that kind of insight as well into the dynamics of how it works between the teams and the correspondence and kind of I guess consulting phase that involves the FIA in relation to those innovations or new things that can be brought as well. And just to even think of modern day examples as well, you've got Mercedes with the DAS system they had a couple of years ago. Ted Kravitz was highly commending Aston Martin for this new kind of a rear wing that they have with the little edges and curtains as well. And you mentioned there was kind of a design process where they consulted the FIA to just verify the legality of it. So it's interesting, just to see in different teams how it works out. And yeah, we're not going to get onto the politics and the drama that happens off track, with some of the team principals, but that's all in the game, and it's all kind of part and parcel of the fun as well. So absolutely. And just to bring it into a different direction as well, George, this year we've had a big emphasis from the FIA on trying to, uplift the introduction of sustainable fuels. So this year we've had a change with a 10% ethanol content with the fuel as well. For the layperson, or for our listeners at home, could you kind of give them an understanding of the complexities of this change with the fuel and the challenges that are have to kind of challenged or overcome with such a change in the regulations of the fuel?
Oh yeah, I mean one of them, one big one is obviously due to the change in fuel, you tend to get less potential for sort of producing heat or producing power, I should say, so mechanical power within the PU. So the challenge that comes with that, well, that's already limited by the fuel flow anyway. But then a lot of that horsepower that's then lost within the PU has to be gained back. So through what I mentioned before in terms of the computer simulations as well as the physical testing to validate that. So it will be finding different parts of different subsystems on the engine that we can use to claw back those horsepower. So that's the biggest one. But obviously, in 2026, we would then obviously be fully transitioning to synthetic fuels. Obviously, the biggest impact on that being sort of the waste products. So not trying to put as much more carbon into the atmosphere as what's been sort of taken from it. So I'll say the biggest things that unfortunately, what we care about as engineers is the power that is lost within the changing fuels, basically regaining that in different parts.
It's so interesting, just to see just how you regenerate energy and make sure that it's not lost so that the engine is as efficient as it can be. And I think that's a credit to engineers like yourself, George, with these. That's one other gripe I'll slightly go on a rabbit hole about as well. You get a lot of people on the outside that say, oh, well, Formula One is just these guys driving these cars in circles, blah, 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 blah. Then they'll say, oh, Lewis Hamilton, just putting a name out there, drives a jet. How is he talking about sustainability? But what people don't appreciate, and I think they need to give more respect to engineers like yourself, George, is that these engines that we have in these cars are the most fuel efficient engines, most power to carbon emission efficient engines we've ever had in any sport or motorsport. So I think there's a lot of praise that needs to go in terms of the advancement and just in terms of the innovation that's been led. And kind of segue into the next question as well, George. We've seen a big emphasis from the FIA and drivers like Seb as well in terms of achieving 100% sustainability within, the field by 2026 as well. With
Mhm.
this in mind, do you think that this goal is obtainable? And what other measures do you think need to be considered to try and achieve this goal, let's say?
I think from the power plants on the cars themselves, I think it's something it's yeah, you can say it's achievable. I think we have to be realistic with the time frame that it can be truly be achievable. But I think other things to bear in mind as well is you have to understand, like, Formula One as well as other motorsports, they're traveling circuses. They travel all around the world, and basically each team sets up shop. You've seen it. They've got their garages. They've got their I don't want to call it fan clubs, like little like huts they set up for people to go in and have a good time and entertain all their fans and things like that. You've obviously got loads of people kind of coming in. Some people driving, some people take the bus. Those sort of things. These things, they don't just teleport from one location to the other. They use, ships, trucks, vans, planes to be transported from location to location. So I think it's a wider issue that Formula One, I think, can only do to an extent, but it's something that I think we can definitely find solutions to work our ways towards there. But it's never going to be like an overnight sort of solution where there's a silver bullet that kind of solves everything. I think things like obviously introducing synthetic fuels, I think is definitely a fantastic start. For instance, I was very privileged to see, obviously, at Silverstone, Seb driving around his converted FW14 that runs on synthetic fuels. It was a great example of, actually, if that's the case, do we go back to how Formula One used to be in, I don't know, the 90s or even the 80s, where it was running just straight kind of just off of pure ice, loud ringing V12s, but that are running on more sustainable fuels? That's a question, I guess, that's probably up for debate. Obviously, in reality, I think the addition of the hybrid element from harnessing electric power as an engineer, I find that very, very interesting and something to delve deeper into. So I don't think that's going away anywhere soon. But yeah, that's just what I think. I think we're going to definitely make progressional steps. So it's never going to be something that I think we can fully eradicate in sort of this quick amount of time.
Absolutely. And to be fair as well, George, I think most reasonable people will be able to appreciate that as well. Like you mentioned, like working on sustainability and making changes for the environment, it's a global issue. It's not just necessarily one in relation to the powertrain aspects of the cars or how they run as well. And like you mentioned as well, I think for the sporting fan like myself, it's exciting to know that these historic cars, like you mentioned there, the Williams FW14B, which was one which was owned by Seb, and other historic cars as well, like like obviously Ayrton Senna's McLaren, or
Yeah,
like Niki Lauda's like ex Ferraris, like the
yeah,
3112T, which we saw
yeah,
Charles do something questionable with at
yeah.
Monaco. I'm not going to get into that, but it's cool to know that these cars, they're not going to be just locked up in a garage and sadly rotting
Mm.
away. That actually, because of the advancement in technical fuels and fluid mechanics and stuff like that as well, that
Yeah.
those historical moments and legacies in Formula One are going to be sustained. And as you mentioned as well, like there's no point, I guess, in doing all the hard work with this V6 hybrid and the hybrid element as well, just to kind of stop. Like there's, I guess, a lot more that can be pushed in relation to it. And we don't only just see it in Formula One, but we also see it quite a lot now with like the World Endurance Series and,
Mm-hmm.
manufacturers like Ferrari, BMW, even Peugeot, for example, really trying to
Yeah.
push the envelope with that as well. So
Yeah.
super excited time, and on the topic of, engine manufacturers and people working on like power units to meet new regulations. The next question, George, is, when a new regulation for a power unit comes through, how early do you start working on it? Which I think you partially answered earlier anyway. And how much work goes into that and what considerations need to be made, for our listeners to understand?
As you said, I think so. My current employer, we're in a very privileged position where I won't say we have a head start, because it's really up to your perspective. Other engine manufacturers down the road, for instance, they have a base to work on. So at the moment, with what's going on at the moment, there's a lot of negotiations actually. So the new those common regulations aren't set in stone. There's still a lot of negotiations going between all the engine manufacturers as well as the FIA. And I think, put it simply, the main reason is because everyone wants to have the best advantage, in terms of how that would basically, fare for them. So you have established engine manufacturers who want things to not change as much, so they don't have to do much changing. So they could have, I guess, less time to, as much time to change on whatever little changes come in the new regulations, as opposed to the FIA as well as new engine manufacturers. They want things to be as straightforward as possible in terms of a power plant, so they can not spend as much money and have as much time as possible to obviously put together sort of title challenges and world championship winning power plants. So I think that's kind of what's going on at the moment. So you may have heard of, in the news, there's a lot of talk about certain OEMs trying to enter the sport as well, and in various different ways. And they are having a say as well. They also would like, obviously, for things to be as plain as possible. I don't want to say too much. I don't know what is public knowledge and what isn't, but certain parts that are being debated, whether they should stay or go, or whether this should be like this or that should be that way. And it's all based on the guys that are in it at the moment who wants things to stay the same because they've spent money and time developing it, and they don't want to deviate too much. And then you have guys that that's going to take ages. We want things to be as simple as possible so we can get in, up there a lot earlier.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned as well, I guess it is kind of unique for each team in terms of what perspective they have and what their situation is in regards to the supplier. But it's so cool as well just to have your perspective as, Redbull Powertrains, and, it's been a very interesting era for you guys because obviously you've had the success with Honda. Now, Honda is still there, but kind of in like a reduced capacity, more on the maintenance side of things, but still there, quite prevalent. And then obviously in the future, what was announced, which was quite exciting, just from the engineering point of view as well, is that Porsche are looking to back Red Bull as well, and what that could potentially do in terms of OEMs potentially joining the sport as well.
Yeah.
And also, sorry, George, yeah.
No, I just said, yeah. I'm not sure what I can say and not say.
Yeah. I know you're treading on thin ice, so I'm trying to keep the things as general as possible, man. So yeah, absolutely. But you're talking about 2026 as well, and a good question that's come in from one of our fans as well is, to set the scene, obviously we know in 2026 the MGUH, that's the motor generator unit heat as part of the ERS system, is likely to be removed. Just from the engineering perspective, George, like how would this affect the performance characteristics of the car in terms of turbo lag and like throttle response as well? And how does that affect your role generally, with that element of the hybrid components being removed? Does that make your kind of life easier, or would it be removed? Is there other like challenges or obstacles you now have to consider in a general perspective?
Yeah, great question, by the way. So yes, MGUH is a very advanced part of the power unit that is able to extract a lot of performance from exhaust gases on the PU in order to, and also improve the capabilities of the turbochargers. Also, for instance, with, as you said, with throttle response or turbo lag. So it is a big part of obviously said engine manufacturers based in Northamptonshire. It was an innovation that I think allowed them to have the dominance they had. So, but it was something that, I don't know if this is public knowledge, but I'll say in plain matters, obviously, they are an OEM who were able to have, and obviously the OEM that have different sorts of vehicles and engine combustion systems that operate in different ways. So I think the MGH actually was a derivative of an innovation that was taken from another part of their business. So in a way, they kind of had a base to start off from, while other engine manufacturers had to basically develop that from, say, quote unquote, from scratch. So as you can see, that is an example of an element that, with that being taken away, it allows other engine manufacturers to kind of be more encouraged to come into the sport because they don't have to try and develop that. But in terms of the pros that it has, that's part of the challenge. It is finding ways to bring back the performance gains that brings in different ways. turbo lag, for instance, the extra performance that it brings from the potential that is still in the exhaust gases, even that it's a waste gas, the potential that that still basically recirculates into the PU, finding ways to basically bring back that performance that we lose from that, or potentially lose from that. That's part of the challenge. So yeah, I think obviously the teams that have already developed it obviously would want to keep it. The new ones would rather not, for obvious reasons. So that's kind of what I'll say to it. But yeah, it is definitely a very complex system to try and develop reliably and in an optimal sort of performance point of view as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And from the sporting perspective as well, you mentioned that like other suppliers and manufacturers are going to be able to enter the sports. And obviously from the fans' perspective, that's great, because we've always said in Formula One that we want to see more drivers, want to see more teams. I'm sure, even though I'm not expecting you to comment on it, I'm sure you've seen some of what we call the silly summer rumors like circulating with certain teams and certain drivers not getting a seat. And if there's just an additional team, an additional supplier, a lot of those kind of issues, they're kind of resolved. And it's just fascinating, because as you mentioned as well, George, like with so many different engine manufacturers, they've got like a worldwide appeal as well. And actually, this is a question that's come into my head as well, George, is, how much of the technology would you say in a Formula One car could you see potentially going into like, a road car that maybe not like a normal guy from North London like me could afford, but like, like maybe somebody else that can afford like, a Mercedes Project One with like a 1.6 liter V6 derived F1 engine, could get to legally run on the streets, or like Aston Martin, Red Bull, Valkyrie, for example, with certain elements from like maybe Adrian Newey's School of Philosophy as well. Like how much of it from the engine side do you think might resurface in road cars for the normal people?
Without getting too much into details, I can think of ones that we're working on right now that you won't see in a while. So let me try and dial back a little bit. Ones that you are seeing. I mean, for instance, the Project One, a lot of the innovations on the Formula One engine that they obviously produced from within the whole turbo hybrid era, you're seeing that in the Project One car. So to be honest, it's countless. I mean, for instance, there are current innovations. I won't go into the details of it, but the current things that are like the big game changers are things like the pre-chamber within the power plant. Is something that is, I think, probably the most valuable IP to each engine manufacturer, just due to how it improves the combustion potential of the mixture of fuel and air in the engine. It allows you to basically gain more power as well as improve your fuel economy, just down to how you're controlling the mixture of fuel and get staggering the combustion processes. So those are things that will definitely feed their way into OEMs, especially if you then add in the use of synthetic fuels. You're then basically improving performance, improving fuel economy, and also improving sustainability as well. So that's probably one of them. The MGUH, for instance, really depends on the business case for it, the cost it will take to develop it in a reliable manner. Because one thing that I think when the transition from Formula One cars to road cars that people maybe don't think of initially is emissions. Because they need to be road legal and they need to basically pass a lot of emissions tests as well, which are always ever growing smaller and smaller and smaller. So synthetic fuels could probably help with that. Other things, I would say, those would be the main ones, I'd say, actually. Those would be the main ones.
Okay, and again, it's interesting you mentioned that as well, like George, in terms of like from an engineering perspective as well, just to see some of those components which we know from F1, some of them then transitioning. Of course, like you mentioned as well, cost is a huge consideration as well for these things, and sometimes it means that certain things will only be limited to a very niche clientele or market of people that can afford it. there's some things which, over time, I'm sure there'll be more ways to make it more sustainable, more cost effective, and they might see themselves trickling down into normal road cars, like we've seen
Yeah.
with I think the new C63. They've talked about an electric turbocharger from, well,
Yes.
the like Merc side of things being
Exactly.
redeveloped and repurposed into like a sports car, which
Yeah.
is kind of middle ground as well. So it's really interesting. And then
Yeah.
on the topic of cost as well, George, to segue into a new topic, this year for the first time we've had like a big kind of change in relation to the cost cap, and we're seeing teams go about repurposing a lot of materials, parts, to be more efficient, and to try and kind of stick within the cost cap. I know that you're not quite there with Adrian Newey and with Helmut Marko and Christian Horner, so I won't go into the financial figures of such. But just from a generic and general point of view, George, is it a thing now where teams are looking maybe to repurpose, resalvage, recycle certain components from a car rather than just like they've got like a huge budget, so they're able to just buy new parts. Are you kind of seeing that, and does that also play a kind of like integral part into your role? In terms of like, okay, like maybe there's X amount of budget, so having to find more creative ways to make more with essentially less.
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%. You're not even only just seeing it you're seeing it in the supply chain as well, in terms of materials, where you can get materials from, um, manufacturing methods. You're looking at manufacturing methods that could possibly achieve the same thing, but at a sort of cheaper scale. Also, in terms of the design as well, sometimes, especially if it's something that is not as critical, you kind of want to do it in the cheapest way possible. So that's definitely something that we're seeing this year within all aspects of the business. Um, yeah, and just to add on to that as well, I think obviously with the increase in cost of living, as well as sort of the limited resources that we're seeing globally, those are things that are affecting us as well. Getting hands on materials is actually becoming harder and harder. You'd be surprised by being able to get your hands on aluminium, for instance. We're having to then go to different parts of the world, which we have had instances where we're now compromising on the quality of foundries, for instance, that we're going to try and source metals from, and things like that, just because of the scarcity, excuse me, of different materials. So yeah, these are things that are definitely kind of affecting us. But again, it just adds. It's like another element that adds to this whole challenge of trying to win world championships through sort of engineering a car to a track.
Absolutely, and like you mentioned as well, it must be rewarding, knowing that all these like extra additional like hurdles you have to jump through, and additional considerations, wider considerations you have to make, in
Yeah.
order to kind of like source those parts that are going to be, key to the performance and also the long-term thing, because we've seen it this season as well, kind of circling back to the reliability thing we touched on. Like, it's so great having a fast car, but you also need it to be reliable and
Yeah.
to be able to perform at that 100% stress level for a
Yeah.
prolonged period of time as well. So there's a huge emphasis on that, and the way that the engineers communicate with the drivers as well, to try and like save the engines and not put so much load and pressure in order to
Absolutely.
kind of get the lifespan out of those parts and those particular units as well. So key. But then, like you mentioned as well, like actually it's cool for, I guess, the smaller teams as well, now that you've got this kind of cost cap measure in, because it gives them, arguably, if you want to go down the philosophical route of it, a fairer playing field as well, for them to also try and catch up, and for
Mhm.
them to try and kind of like fight the big giants like yourself as well at the top and the pinnacle of the sport as well. So
Mhm.
I'm really thankful we touched on that, as well as the kind of socio-economical aspect of like the cost
Yeah.
of living crisis in that too. And keeping it on a positive note as well, George. It must be a very exciting time to be working for Red Bull. Obviously, in the engineering department as well, we touched on the fact that Honda have been very prevalent in Red Bull's success of recent years as well. But also this year, they've kind of taken a more reduced role, and it's been
Mhm.
rebranded with the Red Bull Powertrain's name as well.
Yeah.
Have you seen like a change in the culture? I mean, when I just to specify as well, when I say the culture, I mean like the working culture, of like having a Japanese engine manufacturer to now Red Bull being more independent and going on their own lead in terms of pushing for development and performance as well, per se.
Um, I would say so to an extent. Yeah. There's definitely been a change in culture. I think one thing to say is Red Bull Powertrains is sort of like a new company in itself. So obviously we're part of the Red Bull group, but it's been comprised of different elements of people from different parts of the industry kind of coming together. And I think what's happened is the lessons learned at other places are being applied here. So even within Red Bull, we have the Red Bull DNA, but then we're kind of coming with it with a kind of a fresh breath air, a breath of fresh air. Sorry, to create an environment that is conducive to people working in high pressured environments where we want to motivate people rather than leading them with fear. So we want to have people who are still well put together even after they've kind of gone through a hard grueling season with world championships and their mental health intact.
Sure, sure. And it's interesting you mentioned that as well, because at the end of the day, we have to remember that, like we're all human at the end of the day as well. And
Yeah,
there has to be a balance between obviously performing at the top level and trying to make sure that, you meet certain expectations, deadlines, criterias, goals, ambitions. But at the same time as well, the human element, of like not overworking people, not overstressing people. Of
yeah.
course, as well, we've got like the summer break, and kind of a question I'm just thinking about leading with this is, like, George, now that things are pretty much shut down, like, what do you get up to in your own capacity? Like, like, is there other hobbies or interests that, you like to get involved in when you're not working at the factory and, like working with the team?
Yeah. I have sort of a lot of different hobbies. I just try and stay fit. Try and play a lot of different sports. Go to the gym. I'm a big movie buff as well, so I'll try and be catching up on some movies in the cinema. Um, those are my sort of engineering hobbies. I like building Legos as well. So that'll be something that I'll be looking to pick up. And yeah, those are pretty much them.
It's interesting though, man, because like you said as well, like you've got like a complete off switch, in terms of the social side, and like you mentioned as well, like being a movie buff and just having that kind of like thing to kind of like put your mind at ease. But also, like you said, you can also exercise your mind and keep yourself kind of engaged, with
Yeah,
even the simple things like you mentioned as well, building a Lego car or
yeah,
trying to do stuff which still kind of keep the mind stimulated in that sense
yeah,
too. So it's
yeah.
interesting to hear that. And
Oh
just on
yeah,
a
I'll
complete,
say that's. Oh, sorry, I was going to touch on that.
yeah.
I think any advice I'll give to young people looking to get into engineering is to try and find hobbies like that. To be honest, I think you tend to find people that want to become engineers. It comes from a sort of hobby that kind of stimulates the brain, but it's fun. It can be challenging, but it's fun as well. Obviously, the classic one is putting together a project car. You may not have the funds or even the space to do that, but you can definitely still try and cultivate that by, like I said, building Legos or kind of working on things on a smaller scale. A big example, I would say, a very good example, I would say actually is working with radio control cars, especially ones that you sort of see going around to like the Schumachers, for instance, or the Tamiyas, because from a vehicle dynamics point of view, they're pretty much set up the same way you set up a sports car or a Formula One car, for instance, in terms of your camber, your spring rates that you have on the car, whether you go for soft or harder springs, the tires, all those sorts of things. So I'll say, in fact, actually, that's something I'm looking to kind of bring back up again as well, and kind of going forward as well. Actually, obviously, as you said, being from North London. Um, North London is not really the hub of automotive engineering, other parts of kind of inner cities. And I think bringing that culture of RC cars where we can put together some events or something like that, I think that's something that probably say just keep your eyes peeled for in the future.
Absolutely, and like George, it's like you can almost see my computer, man, and like just the
Oh,
notes I've got
sorry.
as well. 'Cause one of the questions I was gonna ask, because I'm conscious of your time, and I think it's always good to have these conversations and lead them with a inspirational and a positive note as well for the upcoming generation. You touched there on like the future generation of engineers, mechanics. My question to you, George, and I'm going to flesh this one out a bit more too, is like, what advice would you have for the young, aspiring, girls and boys looking to, have the success academically and also career-wise that you've achieved, and what advice would you give to a younger version of yourself too? Because like, again, another thing I can interject and say as well is, growing up in North London and coming from the background we have too, like you go to a secondary school and sometimes I feel it's not catered necessarily to our strengths.
Yeah,
So I think you hit the nail on the head. I'm so glad you spoke on that as well. You touched on the importance of having parents that are very supportive and also like keeping you grounded and focused on the long term goal as well. And I remember going to the school we talked about as well. Some teachers were great, and they really kind of like uplifted me to where I am today. But then there were other teachers where they just did the bare minimum, let's say, to put
yeah,
it
yeah,
politically correct, and
yeah, yeah,
they weren't so bothered about where I was going to end up in 5, 10, 6, 12,
yeah,
15,
yeah,
20 years in the future. And I had to dig deep and kind of find it in myself, to stay out of trouble and kind of
yeah,
do what's right by me. So
yeah.
with all of those considerations in mind as well, George, like, what advice would you have? And kind of bringing it back to the question, what advice would you give to a younger version of yourself too?
Yeah. Um, so the advice I'll give to young people, as a younger version of myself as well, would be, so yeah, especially if you're looking to get into automotive engineering or any engineering in general, um, get into RC cars. That's one. Or get into, it could be RC cars, it could be drones, it could be just picking up a Raspberry Pi, just something that allows you to basically start to build and flex those, let's call them engineering muscles from a young age, and then you start to actually find, you can apply that to your schoolwork. So the schoolwork that you probably find boring, you can see that actually, oh, it's interesting because you start to see the end goal of how that applies in the real world.
Mhm.
That would be one advice. The other advice, and this is something that I think as a young person, I'll give to myself, and I kind of luckily stumbled upon as well, is I didn't meet, so I'm an engineer today, but I didn't meet an engineer until I was in uni doing my placement year, and I was surrounded, an office full of engineers. Before that point, I'd never met an engineer. So utilize the internet. Internet is a very, very awesome tool for gaining knowledge on things that aren't accessible to you, I guess, in the physical world. You can't just go down the road, or if you don't know someone that's an engineer, and ask them questions. Just scour the internet, for different bits of information and things like that. A lot of my learning because learning never stops. Obviously, yeah, I went through academia, but a lot of my learning was online as well. YouTube, for instance, you could just search for stuff. There's, for instance, like, even though that may be high level, but if you're at the level, if you're in university, for instance, and you found, okay, my professor didn't explain this to me in a way that I understand it, and he's never in his office, you can go on YouTube and you can find hours and hours and hours of other lectures or people explaining things that they break it down in a much simpler way. And sorry, I said at university level, it's for all levels actually. So utilizing the internet is another example. And what other advice? Just be courageous as well. Be courageous and go for things. Don't be afraid to make mistakes either. Especially if you come from a particular background that isn't, I would say, the status quo with engineering or, motorsport or F1 or whatever. Don't be afraid to not know things. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Make those mistakes and learn from them. Ask those questions. And even if you feel silly for 2 minutes, it's better than feeling silly forever. So ask those questions. Make those mistakes. Essentially, I guess philosophically, go for the gap. As Max does. Um, so yeah, those would be the bits of advice I'd give.
Thank you for that, George. Because honestly, I think that in itself is so, so, so valuable. And I wish I had somebody like you, man, growing up that could, like, even though ironically enough, we went to the same school. Like,
Yeah,
I wish, like, now, like, looking back at my younger self, I wish I had somebody like you, like a mentor like you, that could, echo these sentiments to me. Because I think that is so, so key. Like you also
mm,
mentioned as well, not being afraid to make mistakes, maximizing what's around as well. Because it's cool that we have like PCs and internets and people on social media having debates and stuff like that and playing FIFA. But there's also more constructive things you can do to use the internet with that will put you in good stead, for your career, a future, a skill that you can enhance and make, a way of living for yourself that you enjoy as well. And it's not so much even a job at that stage, it's just like a dream becoming a reality. So very motivational, George, and I'm just super, super thankful and appreciative of your time. You've smashed it on this episode as well. Thank you, for everything that you've given us and stuff like that as well. And George, just before we let you go, I just was gonna ask you, if you have any final words, anything else you wanted to say, and also just where can they find you? I know that you're gonna be keeping low profile on the social medias, but in a professional context, if like a young student, for example, or somebody needs to hit you up on LinkedIn and they've got any questions or they need some advice on LinkedIn, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I mean, on LinkedIn, I go by my full name, Olabode George Brown. So Olabode spelled Olabode. On social media, I am on social media. I don't tend to use it as much, but I am looking to try and pick it up again because I'm actually looking to start doing some content. I feel like I want to find a way to try and educate younger people on engineering in a fun way, in an engaging way, and also I guess obviously inadvertently kind of offer some inspiration as well. So I think I might be using my current social media. So on Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. Actually, I don't use my Twitter. I go by Divus Georgius. So that's Divus and then Georgius. So Divus Georgius. I believe it's Latin for Saint George, if I'm not mistaken. When I googled that as a younger person, I think that's what I found. So that's why I went with that. So I guess look out for some content on that coming soon. Like I said, I'll probably be covering stuff. I'll be covering like myself putting together like an RC car and trying to race it around. So the two big things I'm trying to do is that. The other thing I'm trying to do is, or the second thing I'm trying to do is, I'll be trying to actually build a sim racing rig. I would probably so that'll be another kind of way of me using it as a hobby. I'll be trying to just do a lot of sim racing on Twitch or YouTube, just streaming that. So I guess you can look out for that quite soon.
Oh, that's brilliant, George. And you touched on sim racing as well, man. My North London brother, we're gonna have to have some races against each other, man, because I'm quite keen on the sim racing too.
All right, cool, man. That's awesome to hear. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not much of a driver, but
you're making excuses already now, yeah?
I'm just saying. I'm more interested in putting it together, but I feel like when I put the sim rig together, I feel like I'll be able to try and get my skills up a little bit. But listen, when it's all put together, I'm gonna shout you, Denz, and we'll try and get some races put together.
Oh, it'd be amazing for the community, man. And just George, I just want you to know that we're rooting for you. We're super excited and looking forward to this content that's going to be coming out as well. We fully encourage it on Stripping the Dipping, and we're really looking forward, to learning. Because another key thing you mentioned there as well, education is key, wisdom is knowledge, and knowledge is power. Power is the key to success.
Exactly.
So
Absolutely.
That is like, so fundamental. And George, you've been an exceptional guest. I'm so thankful, appreciative. Oh, anytime. We need to get you more often. I think you're going to be a fan favorite and a regular for us. So.
No problem, man. No problem. Honestly, thank you, Georgie, for reaching out to me. Thank you, Denz, for today. Honestly, I love the energy, man. I love what you guys are doing.
Oh, thank you so much, man. And it's inspiring and it gives us the motivation, to continue going and to continue, putting out this amazing content as well, man. Absolutely. And it wouldn't be possible without stars like yourself. So big up yourself, George. Thank you again. Georgina's going to put the link in the description and all the social media platforms as well, where you can follow George and, ask any questions as well. And, from us here at Stripping the Dipping, it's been another sensational banger, if I must say so myself. AMG Denz, DJ Denz, the modern day Morgan Freeman. Again, it's been great. It's been a pleasure. And we hope everybody listening has a great day. Share this with your friends. Share this with everybody. And until next time, guys, it's been us from the Stripping Dipping podcast. We'll catch you soon. Peace.
Peace out.